Hi everyone, my name is Angela Cleveland. I'm a former school counselor from New Jersey, and I'm going to share with you some of my personal experiences writing therapeutic books and helpful professional resources for school counselors. You can get a copy of this presentation by going to my website, angelacleveland.com, and you can look under presentations. I'll also drop the link to this slide deck, which is in the bottom right side of this screen here, in the information on this video. You can also scan the QR code. So the title of this presentation is Don't Just Leave It to the Pros, You Can Be an Author Too. Love the puns. So let's get started. I'm going to share with you just really what my journey was and some of the challenges that I had, and hopefully it will help you along your journey to writing your novel. So what sparked my interest in writing a book? Well, it's kind of a funny story, but it essentially started with a groundhog. So one summer I was outside gardening and I fell in a gopher hole and I twisted my knee and really injured myself. I was out of work from June until November. So it was a time where I was really stuck at home and couldn't really do very much and was just trying to recover from this injury. So around that time, my little nephew, who was only just 5 years old at the time, was diagnosed very unexpectedly with type 1 diabetes. He was in a hospital that was about an hour away, but I couldn't even go and visit him because if my leg wasn't elevated for certain periods of time, it just like swelled up tremendously. So I felt really frustrated. I saw how my brother and sister-in-law and the rest of my family was really struggling with the shock of this diagnosis and learning how to manage it. And, I know that my nephew was just so little, and just for him to understand what this meant, the needles, checking his blood sugar level and the insulin injections, it was just a lot to suddenly deal with. And I felt so helpless because I couldn't be there. Not that there was anything I could do to change it, but I just felt like I couldn't be there. So there was a moment where it was the middle of the night. I remember it was like 2:30 in the morning, and this idea for a social story came to me. I thought about my skill sets as a school counselor, which meant that oftentimes I would write social stories for students who were struggling with different issues, and I'd make them as the central character. We'd sometimes write them together. And I thought about tapping into those skills as a school counselor in order to help my nephew and also the rest of my family. So I had looked up some books about children who were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and I didn't really see a whole lot of resources out there. And that's where I decided, you know what, I'm going to write a story that is geared toward my nephew with, his different interests, his strengths, and tap into some of the counseling skills that I use, such as muscle relaxation, deep breathing. I love using music with my students. So I looked at all of these different strategies that I know how to use as a school counselor, and I employed them as an aunt to help my little nephew. So I really wanted to focus on a strengths-based approach, and I used, you can see over here, I listed all of these different strengths that I tapped into, personal strengths, and I looked at my nephew's strengths, and I put together a book, which I'll show you. It's called Peter's Special Concoction, How a Little Boy Learned to Manage Type 1 Diabetes. So in it, I have at the end like a lot of different strategies that someone can use, like some discussion questions. Like really, this isn't all that different from what we're doing as a school counselor. But I share this with you because what led to this first book that I wrote was really looking at, there's a need that's out there for resources like this, and that these resources didn't exist. And I wrote this for my nephew, and he really enjoyed it. I have a personalized book for him with photos, and it uses his name. This is actually his middle name. But at that point, my husband said to me, you know what, you notice that there's nothing else out there like this. Why don't you try to publish it? So with nothing else to do at home, I looked into self-publishing, and I found that it was really easy using CreateSpace and Amazon in order to self-publish. I connected with an illustrator who was a friend of a friend and looked at some of her drawings. I really liked them, described what I wanted, and she helped me out. So that was, kind of what launched me into this space, having all this extra time, seeing a need that was out there that wasn't being met, and tapping into my school counseling skills. skills. So I encourage you to really think about when you have students who are struggling with different challenges, if you can't find the resources out there, this could be a good opportunity for you to create those resources yourself. And school counselors are so resourceful. I find that they're posting a lot of content on Teachers Pay Teachers or other similar websites, Counselor Created. There's lots of information that's out there. And that's really, when you look at those resources, that's really born out of the fact that, certain types of curriculum don't exist, or certain materials that we need for small groups or for families don't exist. So, we tend to fill those gaps and meet those needs of students. So that's a real strength of school counselors. So getting started, I'm going to cover all of these different topics: why publish, how to build your base, how to identify your support system, looking at your audience. I'm going to share with you a sample prospectus that I developed that helped me with pitching my book to some publishers. So this is just a quick overview, and when you look at my slides, if you want to skip to any one of these sections and see those slides, you can just click on that text and it will bring you to that slide. So what's your reason for wanting to publish? So I get a lot of questions, and now that I have several books out, I get a lot of questions from folks about, I have this great idea, I want to publish a book, and they envision a writing process that's glamorized on TV, where you're sitting there and you have like a beautiful view from your window, and you have your coffee or your tea, and you are just, writing, and it's just an amazing process, and then all of a sudden the royalties start coming in, and you're going to make all this money. So none of that is true. I'll talk a little bit more about the process of writing and publishing. But you really want to think about what's your reason to publish. If it's just to have some extra income, I can tell you that it took me a while to actually, it was a huge investment of my time and my own personal resources. And you don't really make that much money unless your book becomes an amazing bestseller. So those stories are, far and few between, but I can say that my driving force to publish was I found that it had to be bigger than just money. It had to be that there's a need out there, there are no resources, and I found that I was also presenting a lot on some of these topics that I ultimately ended up publishing about, and I couldn't meet the demands of the participants who were reaching out for more information. So at that point, I felt like, I'm at this crossroads. Either I'm going to stop presenting about some of these topics that I really enjoy, such as, technology tools for school counselors, because I can't, manage 40 hours of follow-up phone calls after each 1 hour presentation. So I'm either going to stop, or I'm going to find a better way to disseminate information and empower folks to continue that journey on their own. So I ultimately felt like it was a good investment of my time, and I felt like it was so good for the profession if I could find a way to empower school counselors to continue the journey of exploring technology on their own. So, it's really important to keep your reason for wanting to publish at the forefront of your mind. Know who is going to benefit from reading what it is that you're writing. It could be a nonfiction book or a fiction book. Is it for entertainment? Is it to ask people to consider the experiences of others if you're telling a story? Is it a resource? Who's going to benefit from this? Envision that audience as you're starting your process. I think that's really key to keep that why at the forefront of your minds. So it's important to build your base. And one of the things that really surprised me as I started, I'd self-published and I've worked with 2 different publishing companies. And the feedback from the publishing companies was that it seemed to be that it was more than just an investment in an idea, because there's lots of great ideas out there, but the publishers are investing in you. And truly, even when you're self-publishing, you're investing in yourself. So anybody can have a great idea, you can have a book out there, but your base is something that you need to build up, that you have, those people who are seeing you as, a leading advocate or an expert or somebody they can turn to on whatever topic that you're interested in. It could even be, if you're looking at some fiction books, it could be that you're involved in some Facebook groups or Twitter chats or other types of communities, meetups, things like that, where you're engaging with other authors. You really want to think about who's that potential audience, who are the buyers, and are you already embedded in that community? If you're not, this is the time for you to start doing that. It's really important, not just from, a book sales perspective, but from a collaborative perspective, understanding what others' challenges are in the genre that you're working in, is really important. So really connecting with that base, rather than like kind of being from the outside, kind of showing people what it is you're trying to convey. I think being part of that community is really important. So you really want to establish yourself as a point person in the field. So how might you get started doing that? There's lots of different ways. I really enjoy connecting online. It gives me an opportunity to connect with people across the country and even around the world about a certain topic. So I really strongly advise using social media to your advantage. And I hear from a lot of folks who say, oh, I'm not really comfortable with that, or I like to keep my social media account private. And I can totally understand those hesitations because I felt the same way. You can start up an account that's a professional account, like let's say you have your own personal Instagram account, so you can start a separate one. But remember that when people are connecting online, unless you're an established organization, they're connecting with a person. It's a little bit, it can cause a little bit of hesitation for folks to connect with a name. Maybe, if you have like a name of a company or like an idea, people want to connect with a person. So make your presence known on social media. I definitely recommend finding a way to, your comfort level where you can share out and keep your account open. So if, let's say on Instagram, you require permissions for people to follow you, on a like professional type of account, that's going to limit some of your exposure versus keeping your accounts open and super professional. You can share out articles, you can follow certain hashtags on Instagram and on Twitter, and you can keep the conversation going. You might be surprised at how many connections you can make in a virtual world. So another way that you can engage online is through publishing articles. So I think it's really important to get your voice out there. You're not giving away all of your content in your book, but you want to start talking about issues that matter to you. You want to establish yourself in a certain community. And then whatever those articles are that you've published, you can share them out on social media. I truly recommend that if you've invested the time in writing an article, don't just share it out the one time that it's published. Continue to share it out at times that you think it might be timely. There's all different kinds of, days or events like National Hamburger Day or Donut Day. Like think about a day, like look at these calendars, try to find a day that connects with the area of your interest and what you've written about, and share out your articles, again, using those hashtags. So it's not sort of like you've written an article and you're done, but really looking at how can you keep that engagement going. You can also look at some other avenues. There's lots of folks who have podcasts who are looking to interview people, and you can share out those interviews. So it's kind of a way to elevate someone else's podcast or their platform for articles or publishing along with your own. It's a mutually beneficial experience. I also suggest that you set up a website, which is easy to do. There's lots of platforms that make it super simple. You can do it for free with Google Sites. You can use Wix or like WordPress. There's lots of different platforms. If you're not sure how to get started, there's usually lots of tutorials that the company puts out, but I also just go on YouTube for my tutorials. I like to see how someone else is setting it up, and I have that video up, and then I have my website up, and then I work from there. It's sort of like having individual support in a weird way, like through YouTube videos. But your website can be a place where you're going to house all of the articles that you publish or any other information. If you're presenting, you can share that information out there. In person, it's really important to attend conferences and meetings that are based on your topic of interest. And you also want to start presenting at conferences and leaving some time for questions at the end. Being involved in that community will really help to continue to guide your discussion and really shape the type of book that you're going to put out there. So again, I can't emphasize enough that you don't really want to, write in isolation, but be part of that community of support. It's really beneficial. And all of this information you can share on your website. I find that for me, anytime I present, I get a lot of people saying, can I have a copy of this slide deck? And I just direct them to my website versus like taking down emails and emailing things out to people. I try to put everything up there. It's also helpful for any conferences where I want to present and they want to see where else I presented. They want to see my resume. They want other types of information. So it's just super easy for me to just direct them to angelacleveland.com and they can sort of explore. I've also gotten lots of great opportunities through my website, and I'll share more about that in a little bit. So I I think one of the key things is identifying your support system. And I want to talk about the difference between validation and feedback. So validation and feedback, they're both wonderful gifts that we get from our support system, our friends and our family, and even people within our professional networks. So they're both wonderful gifts, but we want to make sure that we understand the distinction between the two. So you definitely want to, ask for some feedback and listen to what folks are saying. But in terms of validation, you don't want to live in this space. Validation, we have those people in our lives who, they love us and, they know that we're kind of nervous about a new adventure or new risk that we're taking. And they're your champions. They're telling you, this is amazing. You're doing a great job. Like they're just giving you the validation and the, they're championing you. And that's wonderful. And we need that when we're feeling down, but we don't want to live in this space because it can get to be like a little bit of a bubble. Think about who the people are in your life who give you the gift of honest feedback. You want to ask for it. You want to be prepared for it because you're oftentimes going to hear things that you don't want to hear. You want to listen to it, and before you start to sort of justify your reasons, just listen and process it. Be grateful for the gift of the feedback they've given you, and know that if you become defensive about it or try to justify some of the decisions you've made, that person who's given you that gift of honest feedback is less likely to do it in the future. So, think about those people who are those straight shooters in your life who understand the audience that you're trying to reach and the message that you're trying to get across in your book, and ask them for some feedback. I can share with you, I have that person in my life, and it was really hard when, I started writing, and she said to me, I put all this work into some of the first chapters of my children's books, and the first thing she said to me is, you need to eliminate the first chapter and rewrite the entire second chapter so that you're not like just introducing the characters, but you're starting with action and then you're introducing the characters through the action. So I listened to that. It was horribly painful. But I was so grateful for it, and it made the books that I was writing so much stronger. So knowing who those people are is really key. And again, recognizing that difference between those people who will give you the validation and go to them when you need it, and those people who will give you that honest feedback. So who is your intended audience? Think about who is your primary audience for this book, and maybe also who's a secondary audience for your book. So it might be, you might be thinking about who's going to pick this up and read this. Is it a professional resource? And if so, who is it geared toward, and who else might find it useful? So for example, for this book that I wrote with Corwin, I co-authored this with Steve Sharp from Pennsylvania. He's with the Pennsylvania School Counselor Association. We thought about how our intended audience for this is school counselors, so definitely geared towards school counselors. But we also considered that, there are other folks who live in the educational space who are not classroom teachers who need to use technology. So we were surprised and pleasantly surprised when we were hearing from media specialists and a lot of technology coaches who are hired by schools to help educators, but they didn't really understand the role of a school counselor. So they couldn't really guide them toward technology tools that would be beneficial for them. So a lot of ed tech coaches picked up this book and they realized, oh, this is what counselors need. They're not every day in a classroom doing lessons and teaching like a set curriculum in a content area, but they're covering different topics, and they need to be able to tap into some free lessons and be able to push out information to students in a way that's meaningful for their profession and for their audience. So, while they're in education, there's so many resources that are geared toward teachers, and we use and we reference these resources in here, but we talk about the counselor use of these resources. So this is, again, we found it was mostly ed tech coaches, media specialists, but we also found social workers, school psychologists, and others in similar non-classroom, based roles really benefited from this. So we were able to engage with those folks. Think about the type of book that you're going to have. Is it going to be a children's book, professional resource, the format, the length? Are you going to have like some supplemental resources that you're going to have available online? You might have some videos or activity pages. All of these can be really helpful to keep your audience engaged. So it's wonderful that they are tapping into the book, but if you also have some extra videos, oftentimes it could just be an author video of you sharing your story about why you wrote this book, maybe gathering some feedback from people posting copies of the book and themselves on social media could be really beneficial. But think about what are some other things you're going to have available to folks so that they're not just reading the book and putting it down, but coming back to it and sharing it out with others. So I think it's also important to consider if you want to have a co-author. So writing with someone else can be extremely difficult. You might have different writing styles. So you really want to consider, if you are going to have a co-author, what would be some of the benefits of that? So I've written 3 books on my own, and 2 of them I co-authored. One of them I co-authored with someone who I have never actually met in person, and this is with NCYI. It's called The Coding Capers, Lucy and the Missing Robot. It's a book about computer science for children. So think about, if there's somebody that I want to write with. So both of these books I wrote with someone else. I looked up their writing styles. I wanted to make sure that it would be a good fit, because if you're writing together, you want to make sure that it's, not immediately obvious like who wrote which parts. Like you want your voice to sound the same in the book. In terms of a co-author, I thought it was really interesting. I'll share with you for Coding Capers, Lucy and the Missing Robot, NCYI introduced me to this co-author, and I had explained to them that I did not want to write this book alone. My background is in school counseling. I have sort of self-taught computer science skills, but I wanted to work with someone who was working in elementary or middle school level, who's a teacher and was teaching computer science. And I knew that that wasn't a strength that I have. I didn't have that audience. I didn't have those everyday conversations with students. So that's how they connected me with Tammy when I identified here's my area of weakness and I need someone who's going to help fill that gap. So that was really beneficial. And it also expanded our market because Tammy's very involved with the Computer Science Teachers Association, or CSTA. She was the president of the Nebraska affiliate group. I have my experiences in school counseling, and I'm presenting a lot and, really making the connection between computer science skills and computational thinking skills and life skills for school counselors. So I felt like these were complementary skill sets. It's also important to consider your working style. Do you want to write together at the same time? Do you want to write separately? And it can be helpful to make an agreement with that person to set some goals and have some regular check-ins. So in terms of this book, Steve and I were both using technology tools, and when I reached out to him about writing something together, we had presented together a few times, and we just found that it was super easy for us to just get up and not have to prepare a whole lot and be able to share out. We both have a really corny sense of humor, and it just worked out. So, and in terms of tech tools, I really didn't want to write a book with someone who was using technology in the same exact way I was. Steve was using technology in some different ways, and there were certainly some intersections with how we were collecting data, but we had different areas of focus. So what we had done with this is we actually listed every tech tool we were using, the audience who would benefit from using this tech tool, and also we created themes. We would use this tool for classroom lessons or for data collection or different ideas. So we kind of made that list, and we realized where our different areas of expertise were, and then we sort of divided up the book from there. And it was really helpful for us to look at where are the competing books. So as you recall, the first book that I wrote was Peter's Special Concoction, and I had already looked online and researched and couldn't find anything that was geared to young kids and helping families. So using a lot of school counseling skills like the deep breathing, muscle relaxation, visualization, all of those things. So you really want to look and see is there something else out there that already exists? And if there is, really think about what's going to make your book different from every other resource that's out there. You want to be upfront with any publishers because they will ask and they will research about these competing books. So it's not something that you want to hide. You want to be really transparent about it. So let's say you might have a different audience that your book is going to reach, or what is going to make it stand out. So for me, I'll give you an example. There's a lot of books that are about like anxiety or kids who worry, but I wrote this book also while I was home with my knee injury, and it's called I'm No Scaredy Cat, but I'm Afraid to Go to School. And I was finding as a school counselor, I had a lot of students who were suddenly like feeling a lot of nervousness about coming to school. It wasn't necessarily a specific thing that was happening, like any bullying, but like something was triggering them, and I couldn't find a resource that was non-clinical. So I don't use the word anxiety in here. I don't diagnose, but I wanted to be able to use some of the strategies that I employ with my students. So I have, of course, the main character of my book is Sydney, my cat, and in here I list a lot of resources, and I'm a huge fan of puns, so I have lots of puns in here. So as an example, I call it the terrible, horrible feeling. And you can see one of the strategies I've used with my students is a graduated list of like, what do you do first if you're starting to feel like maybe your heart is racing? So recognizing some signs, and then what can you do to help yourself? And it's an index card that we write out together, like take 10 deep breaths, identify 10 red things in the room, have a drink of water, go to the bathroom, and it'll slowly increase. So step one is not immediately leave class and go to the school counselor or call your parent to come pick you up. We have different steps, and we all know that when we're feeling stress, that it's really important to have some of these steps written down because it's hard to think clearly in the moment. So again, really think about what's already out there and what's going to make your book different. Let's talk about research. Why this topic? Why is this topic going to be relevant in 1 to 5 years from now? Remember that it could take at least a couple of years for your book to be published, and what's a topic that people are talking about now may not be a topic that they're discussing much later on. Who else might be interested in this topic? And try to get a pulse on what some of the trends are. So think about not just what's meaningful now, but what you might project as being meaningful content that people will want to purchase and read in the future. You'll want to make sure that you have a strong bio. What makes you different? Why are you the person to be addressing this topic or sharing out this story? You'll want to make sure that you link to all of those articles that you've published, to the presentations, and to any podcast that you've been in. Essentially, you are creating a bio that establishes you as a leading expert in this field. You'll want to make sure that you have an outline or some sort of infographic about your message. Have a strong elevator pitch, which is really, really hard to do when it's a topic that you're really interested in. For example, I know that it's very difficult for me to summarize what I'm working on or some things that I have just a deep knowledge about for these specific topics, and I find that it's very difficult for me to just summarize it in one sentence. So make sure that you have that elevator pitch, because lots of folks will be asking questions, and you want to be able to talk about what your book is about pretty much in a nutshell. For nonfiction books, I find that it's really helpful to use outlines, but you'll have to find a way that works for you. Some people really like to work with spreadsheets or post-it notes. They like to storyboard on their wall using post-it notes. They like to use some digital types of post-it notes like Google Keep. Other folks like to use mind maps to connect ideas or even storylines together if you're writing a fiction book. But any type of infographic could help you to organize your ideas. So what I have here is I've created a sample book prospectus, which is pretty much what I've developed when I was working with one of the publishers. And I think it's just a really helpful outline. So if you want to see what it looks like, you can click this link, and I have this available on my website. If you want to make a copy, you can just literally type in this link here, and it'll bring you to a page that forces you to make a copy. So it'll look like this. So you can have your own copy and edit it. But let's say you just want to see what it looks like. So you can click over here. And what I have is I've created this outline, and all of this is linked to different sections. So a little bit about the book and what the table of contents might be, some sample material, alternative titles, a schedule, some publishers. If you have, a co-author you're working with, you'll want to include their information there as well. So I just have like sort of a rough outline that I've created, but you can find lots of these types of outlines online, just using the Google machine. This is what I've used, and I find that it is really helpful for me to organize my thoughts. So you'll want to write a chapter or two as a sample. You don't want to finish the entire book unless it's something that you're really committed to and you're maybe self-publishing, or you're just really set on a certain idea. I think it's helpful to just kind of get started with what you're writing. So typically I find a lot of publishers will share the book out with some sample audiences to get some feedback. So if you have completely written your book, then if they come back to you and have some suggestions of things that you need to change for it to be marketable, it's a really painful process, and it can almost feel like more work to start to kind of edit and adjust the content than it can be to start, building information out. So I find it's really helpful for nonfiction if it's a professional resource to sort of chunk the content a little bit. And for fiction, it's really helpful for you to have a really good opening chapter with a hook. So some advice that I got from a friend who gave me some honest feedback was that, for some of the children's books, she said families will go to a bookstore or they'll look online and they'll read the first chapter. And if you don't really have a very strong opening chapter or some sort of hook that's going to draw them in, they're unlikely to purchase the book. So I made sure that I had a really strong opening chapter. You'll want to identify a list of some potential publishers. So how do you find these folks? Well, you're going to look for some similar books, similar topics. There are some publishers that focus exclusively on professional content or nonfiction. They might have some publishers who exclusively work with children's books, and then there are subgenres from there. So try to find something that's similar enough and see if you can find some common threads with, this publisher went with this book, and my book would be a good fit for them. Because it connects to, the audience that they typically have tapped into, and they know that audience really well and how to reach them. You might want to make some connections to other authors who have worked with that publisher as well. And the other option is you can self-publish, but there are definitely some pros and cons. My personal recommendation as someone who started with self-publishing and then moved on to working with some publishers is that I feel like as a first-time author, it's a good idea to work with a publisher because they offer you some framework and advice that you can use should you choose to self-publish some content later on. So I do think it's helpful, but definitely with a publisher, it's sort of a back and forth of ideas, and so you have to be really flexible going into this, but know that they're working with a team of experts. They know what sells, they know their audience, they're coming in with information from their experiences, from just being in the field that you may not have unless you've worked in publishing before. So in terms of self-publishing, Amazon is really great. They have an easy system for folks to get an ISBN number and to publish their content. The other thing I found is that Fiverr is a really great website. It's a platform for people who like to freelance. So I turn to them a lot for formatting the books, especially the e-version of books, because I just found that, as much as I have some really good technical skills, there were so many nuances that it was extremely difficult for me to figure out all of these nuances, and it was just worth it for me to pay someone else to help me with the formatting. And I found some great people there. You can read reviews and find someone who's the right fit, and they do this for a living. I found for some of these books, like it took me more time the first time around to format for the ebook than it took to write and edit and work with an illustrator. It just, that was my sort of tipping point. And you can, there's different amounts that they charge. I think I spent about $100 or so to have someone format the book for me for e-publishing, so that was helpful. And you'll want to look up some images. Make sure that you're being really careful about any images that you may pull offline, that you have the rights to them. It's not just the rights to use them, but to use them and be able to make money off of them. So I found with my illustrator that I wrote up a contract and just found like kind of a sample contract online, and just let them know that I wasn't going to give them a percentage of the book sales, that I was just purchasing their images that they created. But there's if you use quotes from other people or other images, a publisher is really good because they already have like contracts and things that people can sign where they release you from, like, they can't come back to you and say, oh, I gave you this quote or I sent you this image and I want a percentage of the book. So there's like a lot of legal ramifications. So you can certainly do your research, but I do find that working with a publisher does help to establish that framework. It can be really beneficial. So in terms of a timeline for writing to book launch, like a lot of people ask, how long does it take? Well, in terms of the planning, there's a lot of self-structure and independence that you have with that. That's your planning. It's, engaging with others, it's presenting, having conversations, seeing what the needs are that are out there, and really keeping an open mind. So you may be going in, with a thought that I want to publish this type of book, but then, in your conversations and you're presenting about this topic, you hear that there's more of a need in another area. So you want to really have that open mind and listen rather than trying to, convince others of your ideas, which can be really hard because we are so passionate about our ideas. But if you're trying to sell books, you want to make sure that it's meaningful for everybody and not just, sort of a passion project for yourself. So in terms of writing, that's really self-structured. It can be driven by timelines by your publisher, but if you're doing this on your own, then you have to set your own timelines and goals. And it's important to identify your work style. I talk to some people who say that they set aside a certain day and time, like every Saturday morning from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. where they write. I did not do that. I found that it was, like really difficult for me to be tied to an exact time. I really like to just kind of go with the flow sometimes. I found that mornings generally were really good. I kind of woke up with thoughts in my head and I wanted to be able to write them down. And then I ran into some busy times where it was really difficult. The other thing that I've done, which, a lot of people do, is they just kind of create a writing retreat. So what you do for a writing retreat is you can select a hotel that's not in a place where you're going to be tempted to like visit other places, or, I've done this while like pet sitting for other people, but basically you want to get out of your house so you're not distracted by, what's going on there or other tasks, and you want to put yourself in an environment where there's nothing for you to do. So I talked to someone who does a writing retreat when she was working on her dissertation. So she would select a hotel room that wasn't like in a vacation-y kind of spot, so there's nothing tempting her away. She would arrange to have like all of her like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and breakfast was at the hotel, but she made like those are her hard stops. And she spent 2 nights in a hotel. I think she did it like once a month or so. And she just, like, for her, what worked is that she said, you know what, I have paid for this place. There's nothing to distract me. Like, she just, made sure that she was super focused. So, and I think she even had like unplugged the TV or hidden the remote so she wouldn't like sort of automatically go to that space, and made sure that she shut down like all of her social media accounts, like just took them off, and, really just invited herself to this creative space and this working space and dedicated that time. So there have certainly been some times where I've created that writing retreat for myself, and I feel like if I've invested in that time, I've kind of built myself up to it. Like, I know next weekend I'm going to spend one day, my friend is going to be someplace else. I'm going to use her house and just like sit in the kitchen and work, and that can be really beneficial. You can also just do it at your local library. There's times where I've gone to like a local cafe or to the library, and I sit down and I've said to myself, like, I am not getting up for the next 2 hours, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to work. And, and I do, but it's really hard to develop that structure for yourself. Sometimes, for me it is. So in terms of the marketing and the book launch, you'll want to set a structure to that, and this can be a lot of work and very time intensive because you're doing a lot of promotion, and you are the one doing this promotion because you're the expert on you and your topic. So you might get some support from the publisher, but really you want to tap into this network, this professional learning network that you've already created. I have reached out to my college alumni magazine, and I shared that information in like the notes, so information gets out there. I have used a lot of marketing tools like through Twitter or through Facebook or Instagram, but I try to be careful not to like flood my pages with lots of information. It's nice, I honestly didn't even tell a lot of people I was writing a book because I wanted it to be like a big, surprise, like this is coming out kind of moment, versus like me posting about it and kind of like saturating my friends and family with, book writing tales. So make sure that you find some great ways to promote. I find that it is really helpful to kind of explore social media as a platform, and there are lots of apps that you can use to draw attention to your book and what you're sharing out. So, you can even start to develop this plan in advance of what you're going to do, like put it on the calendar and tap into that. And in terms of engagement, there's a lot of structure to this on your own. You can share out, like I've posted Amazon reviews and thanked people, tried to keep the conversation going, try to have some really authentic conversations, not make it all about, promoting the book. But you'll really want to kind of develop a plan for yourself that you feel comfortable with. And remember your why. It's unusual to get rich off of your books, but you want to leverage your book for other opportunities. So for example, I set up my website and I was presenting a lot about tech tools, and I was writing articles, I was on podcasts, I was sharing out a lot. And then one day I got a message through my website from the government of St. Martin, the educational department, and they said, this is fantastic. You seem to be somebody who's really comfortable talking to school counselors and others who are in those sort of advising roles. Would you and your co-author be willing to travel to St. Martin? We'll pay you a speaking fee and cover your travel costs. And we want you to do 2 full days of training in August, and then another 2 days of training and site visits in September. So I didn't get rich off of the book, but I had this amazing travel and connection opportunity, and it was just like personally so rewarding to work with school counselors in another country and to learn about their educational systems, what are some of the commonalities and what are some of the differences, to be able to kind of just get that sense of their different approaches, and it was just so rewarding. So you can leverage these opportunities to present in some different areas and connect with others. So the book is kind of, like a foot in the door in many ways. If you decide to present at some conferences, you can often set up exhibiting and you can sell your book there, have some autograph copies that you give out, but just definitely think about marketing. So with Amazon, they do have Amazon advertising where you can explore and you can find ways to promote your book. You've seen this if you've been on Amazon, where it says, if you've liked this product, you might like something else. They'll make suggestions. So that's something you can take advantage of. Facebook has advertising. So does Twitter, Instagram. There's lots of different platforms. So you don't want to, use all of your money to advertise, but you want to find a platform that you're comfortable with, that you can at least get started, because if you don't have a background in marketing, it can feel a little bit daunting. Again, I've used a lot of I've used a lot of just YouTube videos to connect. The other thing is thinking local. I dropped copies of my book off at my local library and some of the schools. I've shared it out. There are lots of organizations that are looking for like swag and free gifts, so I've shared those out. And anybody who I gave a free copy to, friends or family or other people in my professional network, I simply asked them in exchange to just, share out some pictures on social media, and if they wanted to leave a review as well. That's always really nice. In terms of Amazon, there's a ranking of reviews. So if it's a verified purchase, that means that they know that is purchased through Amazon. So it carries more weight than if you gave the book to someone else and they posted a review. anybody can post a review, so they don't know that you actually bought that book, but so those verified purchases can really help. But any reviews are really good. Any, like just asking people like, how else might you use this? You'd be surprised at some of the other suggestions of audiences that your readers may have. So in terms of some lessons learned, when I say I'm writing a novel, I really like this little graphic. Sort of, what my friends think I'm doing is it's so glamorous, like I'm in a coffee shop, I'm writing. What the media portrays as writing is, very glamorous. There's all different perceptions, but it can be a really frustrating process. And, you may have some great ideas, but there's so much editing involved. And I found like I just got like so tired of reading my own writing. It was extremely difficult. So I used a lot of apps that would just play back what I had written, because I found it just was hard for me to like sit and read everything. I felt like I had it memorized, and so it really helped me to use these apps. I also use, there's like Grammarly and some other apps that can help with catching some mistakes. So these are some of the most common questions that I get, which I've talked about some of these. And one is, when did you first realize you wanted to write? And I've shared that definitely when my nephew was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, I did not think I wanted to write for a wider audience. I wanted to write for just him and for my family. And then once I did that, and my husband was like, you're saying there's nothing else out there like this, you should consider publishing this. That was kind of my launch into writing, and it just like really excited me. And then I started thinking about, what are some of the other resources as a counselor that I had been looking for and couldn't find? So that really led me from, writing this book for my nephew, and then writing this book that I could use as a school counselor that, didn't use clinical terms to describe anxiety, but just, kind of talked about some simple strategies that we could all use. Like, for example, I really like music as a playlist. So I call it like, it's like a, powerful or powerful playlist, like using pause for cats, but basically like using like a playlist that makes you feel excited and powerful, like having a go-to song or a mantra or things like that. Like those are just, things that we could all use as coping skills. So I didn't want to have anything like super clinical, because a lot of times these families, it could take them a while if, their child was still struggling. It could take them a while to even get an appointment with a therapist or to get a diagnosis. So I didn't want to be in a position where I was using diagnostic terminology as a school counselor when they, were still in that process of seeking treatment. And sometimes just using these strategies just helped, with the students, and, helps with me too. Like, these are life strategies. And then the next resource that I developed is, I thought a lot about how I had so many students as a counselor in my social skills group who didn't really understand about their own emotions or emotions in others. And so many of the books that I was looking at, they were focused on kids with autism or some other developmental challenges. And I felt like I needed a resource that, again, didn't use clinical terminology, but I could use as sort of like a guidebook for my conversations with students. So I didn't really find anything, and then I decided I was just going to create it. So what I did is I have like different fruits. It's called the fruit files, and I have different fruits in here where I have about identifying these emotions in others, like what does this look like, what's some of the body language that you might see, and then how does that look like, how does that emotion look in ourselves, like what triggers that emotion, how do we feel when certain things happen. So I just really wanted to like look at others and look at ourselves, and for me it was just so much easier to write this using fruits than it was to use actual human faces, because there's so many different muscles and complexities. I wanted to highlight like how your eyebrows might look, like how your arms will look, body language, things like that. So that's kind of like where my journey took me. It was pretty much always asking that question of like, does this already exist out there? Oftentimes it was just through my own searches, and when I was frustrated that I couldn't find that resource, I went back to maybe I should develop it. So that's where I get my ideas. And in terms of the writing process, I've shared no, I don't like it. I do it because it's I have an idea that is in my head. It's almost like an itch that I feel like I have to scratch. Like I have this idea and I feel like, others could benefit from this. Like I wish others knew this. Like I wish that they, knew that this tech tool was there or that this resource is there. And so it just kind of like gets at me until I can like put it down in writing. But it's not like this amazingly enjoyable process for me. It's more so like this urge that I have to share out, especially knowing my why is that I want to help others. So when I see online or hear from others in my learning community that they're struggling with certain ideas, or how do I communicate this to others? How do I, teach my child about computer science concepts when I don't really understand what they are? Like all of these different struggles I was listening to, and it just, kind of pushed me into action. So I was really leading with, listening to the voices and the concerns of others. I talked a little bit before about how I make time to write. So generally I do like some of those morning times. I find, tapping into when you feel you can best write is really important, and honoring that time is really good. So I tend to be an early morning type of person. Like as soon as I get up, those ideas are there, and it really helps me to just get them out. But also setting aside some time when I knew like I had to edit, which was like painful for me. Setting aside like a writing retreat to get some of that work done was really key. And the most rewarding part of publishing for me is that I love being able to help others. It's really amazing to, be able to fill a gap and know that there are, families or, professionals who are looking for different resources, and maybe this is something that can really help them. So that is definitely super rewarding. And definitely like the unanticipated benefits of publishing are, I didn't realize how many doors it would open for me to present at different conferences and to share out. So I really enjoy doing that. Just on my own time and volunteer, like I'll do a lot of presenting to grad students or, some helpful conversations with others, but on certain topics, primarily technology and computer science. But I really do enjoy the connections and the opportunities that publishing has opened up for me. And lastly, don't forget that writing can be really tough, but so are you. And these are just some fun quotes that I have found. I think it's just, good to have a little bit of humor and know that it can be a little bit of a difficult process, to certainly publish or to get your ideas down, especially if you're not like from this field. But remember your why, keep that at the forefront. Definitely like look at what else is out there, and who knows, like you might have something that's a really great bestseller, and that would be amazing. Or you can leverage your book to open up other doors of opportunities and connections and collaborations in the future. Thanks for watching.